This is CBN Newswatch.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for CBN Newswatch. I'm George Thomas. We begin overseas, where the government of Iran is facing widespread protests from its own people, and it is cracking down in return. So far, the U.S. has clearly stood with the protesters, but they have stopped short of calling for regime change. My colleague Heather Sells is covering the latest developments there. Heather.
George, over the weekend, Iranians took to the streets in more than 100 cities. You may remember over a year ago, the U.S. renewed U.S. sanctions against Iran after pulling out of the nuclear deal, and the country has been struggling economically since that time. Iranians have held economic protests before in 2017 and 2018, but this time they're in at least 116 cities. In some cases, the protests have turned violent, with demonstrators setting fires. There have also been reports of gunfire. At least 3 people have died. What sparked the outrage this time? The government's hiking of gas prices, up by 50%. In response to the protests, the government shut down internet access over the weekend to the country's 80 million people. Iran's supreme leader is backing the government's gas hike and signaled a potential crackdown on the protesters, calling them thugs. Meanwhile, the U.S. is backing the protesters.
These developments that you see right now are their own people telling them we need change, and to sit down with the American government and let's negotiate this so that it's to the benefit of all.
But Ambassador Rakolta made clear the U.S. is not calling on the protesters to overturn the government.
We're not advocating regime change. We're going to let the Iranian people decide for themselves their future. But their future is to be part of the world community.
George, that official death toll number of 3 people comes from Iranian authorities. The semi-official Fars news agency says there have been at least 87,000 protesters so far, and that authorities have arrested some 1,000 people. Yeah,
those numbers can always be dubious when it's coming from the Iranian regime. Heather, thank you so much for the latest developments there. Mike Ansari, he runs one of the largest Christian satellite channels that's beaming gospel programs into Iran 24 hours a day. Mike, great to have you back on the show. Listen, it's been more than 2 days now. The government has shut the internet service. Are you worried that this could be a threat to the safety and well-being of Iranians?
Absolutely. Much like the West, the Iranian infrastructure is based on telecommunications, which internet is a major part of that. So Iranians are communicating with each other through governmental agencies and also through companies and other ways using internet. So it is a major blow to the communication mechanism in Iran.
In fact, the U.S. high-ranking U.S. ambassador said that the U.S. has the ability to turn the internet back on. I'm curious, what are you hearing from your sources inside the country right now? What's the mood?
We had several people call us within the last few days. They are telling us that effectively Iran has shut down all the internet and access for people to communicate with each other and with people outside. They want to keep it hushed and they want it closed and contained. We had a call from a lady named Parisa who lives in Iran, and she said that they're feeling disillusioned and hopeless. We also had a call from a gentleman who is a Muslim background convert to Christianity, and he's saying, what is our role? Do we go and join the people outside in demonstrations as new Christians, or do we stay inside and pray for Iran? It seems that there is discontent, there is anger, there's frustration with the Iranian leaders and the economic elites.
I'm curious, as you know, Mike, protests have broken out in more than 100 cities and towns. How do you compare this latest demonstrations to previous ones, for example?
It's very, very similar. Back in 2017, we realized that there was a huge uprising across Iran, protests to Mr. Rouhani, the president, and they were economically based. People were not happy with the economic decisions that the leadership of Iran was making for Iran. They were chanting the same slogans back then that they're chanting this time. And that is basically, who cares about Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, when our own people in Iran are going hungry? So the slogans are the same as 2 years ago. It is basically a domino effect. It is this reiteration of the same line of anger and frustration today as we saw back in 2017.
And Mike, to that very point, you know, they're supposed to be demonstrating and protesting against petrol, gasoline prices going up. But in many instances, as you mentioned, they are actually chanting against the regime, specifically the supreme leader, right? And in fact,
Absolutely.
burning pictures of him and so forth.
Absolutely. The supreme leader came on TV just a couple of days ago and called his own Iranian citizens that are dissatisfied with the situation hooligans. That is a huge insult to the Iranian population that are trying to survive. They're realizing that their wealth, their money is going into exportation of Shiite Islam and its ideology to the region while they go hungry. Iran is a petroleum-producing country.
Yeah.
Therefore, it should not deprive its own population of the basic petroleum resources.
Mike, real quickly, we got 30 seconds left. There's a huge report detailing Iran's extensive influence in Iraq. Real quickly, tell us about it.
Intercept published a unprecedented leak from secret agents that were working in Iran, indicating that Iran has had a systematic approach into Iraq and its neighbor, trying to infiltrate and trying to monopolize some of the institutions across Iraq to be to advantage of Iranian ideology, Shiite Islam, by kicking out the Christians from the region, replacing them by Shiites, and by also electing leaders that would be sympathetic towards Iran and its goals overseas. It's a major undertaking that needs much attention.
Okay, terrific. As always, Mike, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. We move now to our nation's capital, where Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi invited President Trump to testify in front of the congressional impeachment panel as the Democrats' public hearings move into their second week. On CBS's Face the Nation, Pelosi pushed back against the president's complaints that the process has been stacked against him. Take a listen.
The president could come right before the committee and speak all the truth that he wants if he wants to.
You don't expect him
if
to
he
do
wants
that.
to take the oath of office, or he could do it in writing. He has every opportunity to present his case.
And Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe of Texas told Fox News the upcoming report from Inspector General Michael Horowitz on how the Russia collusion investigation got started could actually be bad news for many in Washington.
The Democrats are racing to get through this impeachment as quickly as possible. That's why we have 8 witnesses and 5 hearings this week, and we're not doing any of the work, is because they know that that Inspector General report is likely to be damning about the origins of the 2016 investigation into the Trump campaign, the role that the Obama-Biden administration officials played in that.
By the way, that report is expected soon. We will have more on this story and others this evening on Faith Nation. As always, you can watch it right here on the CBN News Channel. Thousands of people gathered over the weekend to remember 2 students shot and killed by a classmate at a Southern California high school. Friends and family gathered last night at a candlelight vigil. This as investigators are still trying to figure out the motive behind what led 16-year-old Nathaniel Tennessee Barhow to go on a shooting rampage at Saugus High School. The teen pulled a .45 caliber handgun from his backpack and shot 5 students at random before shooting himself in the head on Thursday. It was his birthday. The school's principal told the crowd at the vigil that the event was a moment to grieve.
Through our courage to grieve and grow stronger, and through honoring Gracie and Dominic, we will remember the Saugus High School community not for what happened to us, but for how we recovered, how we grieved together, and how we became strong, Saugus strong.
Saugus High School will remain closed until December 2nd. David Daleiden and other undercover investigators with the Center for Medical Progress were found guilty in a civil suit by Planned Parenthood for their undercover videos. A San Francisco jury handed down the verdict in the case, finding them guilty for their part in getting the undercover video, which showed Planned Parenthood employees discussing the buying and selling of aborted baby body parts to third parties who harvested them to resale. LifeSite News reports they were found guilty of various crimes. Attorneys with the Thomas More Society defended them and say this case was simply Planned Parenthood trying to get them back for exposing their, quote, dirty business. They will plan to appeal the ruling. You can find the full story at cbnnews.com. Chick-fil-A has announced it is making a major change to its charitable giving. The company now says that its new initiative will no longer include donations to organizations like the Salvation Army, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and the Paul Anderson Youth Home. Critics have called those organizations anti-LGBTQ groups. Chick-fil-A's president told BizNow that there's, quote, there's no question. We know that as we go into new markets, we need to be clear about who we are. There are lots of articles and newscasts about Chick-fil-A, and we thought we needed to be clear about our message. The company said it is committing $9 million toward 3 specific initiatives: education, hunger, and homelessness. Coming up, protesters and police clash in Hong Kong in what is some of the worst fighting yet. That story in a moment.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Welcome back to the CBN News Channel. Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests have turned the most violent they have been in 6 months. The protests started peacefully in early June, sparked by a proposed law that would have allowed criminal suspects to be extradited to mainland China. But video from today shows some of the worst fighting since the protests began. For days, protesters had barricaded themselves on the campus at the city's Polytechnic University and are now using catapults against riot police in armored vehicles trying to get out. The clash is setting at least one armored car on fire, and one police official was hit in the leg with an arrow. Hong Kong police are calling on protesters to surrender and face justice. My colleague CBN's Gary Lane spoke with someone who knows the pro-democracy movement very well. Andrew Duncan helped hundreds of pro-democracy activists protest the NBA's China policy at the Nets Raptors game last month, and is also the co-producer of the Netflix documentary Joshua Wong, Teenager versus Superpower.
Andrew, thanks for joining us. So it seems like 6 months of protests now are entering a dangerous stage, and Beijing has moved troops into Hong Kong. China's Global Times newspaper says the Chinese government should use snipers to shut down violent protesters. Your thoughts on this, please?
I think it's very alarming, especially that we're in the midst of the administration's trying to close a trade deal that after the WTO and Beijing's inability to stick to the terms of that, and now that the joint resolution between Hong Kong and London is being fundamentally broken, I find it very troublesome and awful. And I think Americans need to know that these are not anti-government protesters, as I've seen on some news websites as recently as this morning. These are pro-democracy protesters that are trying to fight against the Chinese Communist Party. And churches and mosques have been victimized by the fighting, and as they have on the mainland. So it's a terribly sad day, frankly.
A Hong Kong police spokesman said on Sunday he called the rioters people who are intent to murder police officers at all costs.
I do think that people should look at the history, and by watching the film that I made with my team, I think they can see that this started peacefully a long time ago, and I think that people are feeling desperate in Hong Kong and that they have nothing to lose. And I am not an advocate of the violence, and I know that Joshua Wong, who I know, and Nathan Law, who I know, and others are not advocates of violence. But things have been brought to desperate times, sometimes have required desperate measures in democratic battles throughout history, including our own in Boston and other places. But it's terrible to see, and it's most disturbing because Beijing is not holding up to the joint resolution. And how can we do a trade deal with people that won't live up to the joint resolution, the Chinese Communist Party, and also, in the meantime, have Uyghurs, almost 3 million people, according to the Pentagon, in concentration camps in mainland China?
Well, you mentioned the violence. You know, most Americans probably support the goals of the pro-democracy activists, but not the violent actions of some. We're seeing Molotov cocktails being made and used against police vehicles, and one protester shot an arrow into the leg of a police officer. But do you think these tactics will cause the pro-democracy activists to lose Western support?
I think there's a risk of that. And I spoke to a family member who lives in Asia earlier today who relayed just that. I do think that the violence is problematic, but I think it should be also noted that a police officer, there's been a lot of police brutality and police violence. Emergency medical workers were actually handcuffed after quietly protesting, and they're not being allowed to demonstrate, which is their right under the joint resolution. And there was obviously a police officer at point-blank range shot a unarmed man in the stomach last week. So violence is never good, and it's indefensible on both sides.
What do you think will happen next? We could be heading to a bloody Tiananmen Square-type crackdown here as things escalate.
Correct. It's very alarming and concerning, and I think that that's why I think the United States should put the trade talks on hold. There shouldn't be a trade deal under the circumstances that are going on right now. I've said before, the NBA should not be in business with people that run concentration camps. The United States government should not be negotiating trade deals with people who are running concentration camps. But with that said, I think that there needs to be a cooling off period. And I think we need to hear from the President of the United States. We've heard very vociferously from Secretary Pompeo and Vice President Pence, who have been consistent in their positions. But we've yet to hear from the President of the United States, who needs to firmly speak out in defense of democracy, in my opinion, and firmly speak out in support of Hong Kong's rights under the joint resolution.
Producer Andrew Duncan, thank you for joining us to provide those insights.
Thank you for having me.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
And ministering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to CBNNewsChannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life, life to the fullest. Life in your family, life in your finances, life in your body, mind, and spirit, life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Conservative podcaster Ali Stuckey appeared before the U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform recently, giving testimony about her pro-life views and explaining why she believes abortion is the greatest horror of our time. FaithWire's Dan Andros spoke with our Ephraim Graham about this trending story.
So, Dan, what did Stuckey tell members of Congress?
Yeah, well, she came right out of the gate, all cylinders firing. She said that she believes abortion is the greatest horror of our time. And she said she's horrified by the violence, the oppression, the marginalization of a defenseless people group based solely on where they reside in the womb. And so from there, she attacked a lot of the common pro-choice talking points, including one that seems to have gone by the wayside, which is the safe, legal, and rare argument that used to be used, and at least, kind of gave us some common ground that we could agree that perhaps maybe we shouldn't be having that many abortions. But that argument seems to have been abandoned, and we've seen the recent extreme abortion bills proposed in New York and Virginia, which allow abortions all the way up to the end of the pregnancy. And so she kind of went after those one by one.
And in doing that, how was the response? She was sort of dismissed, if you will.
Yeah, it really was interesting to watch because you could see people in the background, including, I believe, a representative from Planned Parenthood who was there. And they were almost chuckling and smirking and laughing in the background as she went through these points. But yet none of these points were addressed directly after she brought them up, and including one of the Congresswomen, Rep. Robin Kelly, who accused Stuckey and other conservatives of not caring about life beyond the womb. And so when Stuckey tried to respond and said, hey, I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive. I can care about life in the womb, and we do care about people once they're born. We just have different policy ideas. And when she started launching into that response, the Congresswoman just said, I'm going to reclaim my time, and just turned off the microphone and sort of shut down the conversation.
Stuckey also challenged modern feminist views, correct?
She did. She said that this was a great quote, one of the ones that's resonating with people a lot. And she said, I'm here as a woman who believes that female empowerment, equality, and freedom are not defined by the ability to terminate the life of her child.
What's ahead for us on the next edition of Faith versus Culture?
Yeah, we've got a series of kind of shocking sex education videos that we found that were targeted at 9 to 12-year-old children. And so it's really kind of stunning to see the sorts of explicit material that they're kind of pushing on these young kids. And it ranges from issues of gender to homosexuality to drag queens, the whole gamut. And so on the show, we cover these things and talk about how we as Christians and Christian parents should be handling the education of our child on that front.
All right. Thank you, Dan, so much. I want to remind you that you can catch FaithWire right here on the CBN News Channel. It begins at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
That was Kanye West and his Sunday service choir singing the popular praise song, "This Is the Day." Wow, it was a full-blown worship service at Lakewood Church Sunday night. West was in the background for much of the service, but he did rap and sing at different times. Earlier Sunday, West joined mega church pastor Joel Osteen for Lakewood Church's Sunday morning 11 a.m. service. He told Osteen how Jesus had changed his life.
I know that God's been calling me for a long time, and the devil's been distracting me for a long time. You know, in my lowest points, you know, God was there with me and sending me visions and inspiring me. And I remember sitting in the hospital at UCLA after having a mental breakdown, and there's documentations of me drawing a church and saying, start a church in the middle of Calabasas. And even after that, I went and made the Life of Pablo album. I said, this is a gospel album. And I didn't know how to totally make a gospel album. And the Christians that were around were too, I would say, beaten into submission by society to not speak up and profess the gospel to, you know, to me, because I was a superstar. So, but the only superstar is Jesus. All of that arrogance and confidence and cockiness that y'all seen me use before, God is now using for him.
West also praised Osteen for his message of hope and pointing people to God's love, despite how some in Christianity criticize him. Well, folks, that is it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. We hope you will join us again next time. From all of us here, goodbye and God bless.